I was a Tableau customer for about 6 or 7 years before I joined the company a couple of years ago. And what I wanted to kind of give you a glimpse of today was how a typical Tableau user interacts with their data and what that experience is like. I went through, we hear these stories all the time, how easy and fast it is, and that first aha moment that you get when you get in there. So I'm going to use some of Ramon's data that Lindsay referred to kind of show you what that experience is like. And I used some diabetes data because my knowledge of diabetes was it's bad for you. Beyond that, I really didn't know anything else. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to kind of delve into the data he had. I mean, I also wanted to look at his work because I think from a format perspective, he is one of the most accomplished designers of visuals. And you know, I'll show you the functionality of how to explore that data, how to build some interactivity in there. And then I'd refer to his work and see how he formatted it and made it really pop, and tell you a story where you're actually focusing on the key elements of what the objective of that dashboard was. So I'm going to start off in Tableau Desktop. As Lindsay mentioned, that's where you're going to do your data discovery. And I'll show you that typical user role where you're the author. You're going to build content, build out your data model. You may even do things to that model that you want to augment it and eventually share that with others if they wanted to analyze that same data from their own perspective. And then we're going to publish it out to Tableau Server, and you'll see that collaboration component. And this is where you're going to share either content internally in Stanford or maybe even publicly, depending on what you're doing. So let's go ahead and jump into Desktop. So this is Tableau Desktop. I'm going to connect to some data. In this case, it happens to be an Excel file. We do connect to about 40 different data sources, and you know, we can touch upon that in more detail in the Q&A if you have something specific. But I think in this case, I'm going to grab that diabetes data. And as I come in, it shows me a preview of what it looks like. So that seems about right. It's basically a tabular format. I see some numbers there and a fair amount of data. So I'm just going to go in there and start exploring it. Right? So Tableau's identified a geo field for me and kind of segregated things that I want to, you know, maybe take sums or averages of, and then categorical fields. So not really knowing much, the first thing I want to look at was how many diabetes cases are there, right? So let's just double click our way through because I don't know how to visualize this. And Tableau says, all right, there's about 381,000 cases, and I'm assuming this is in 2013. So 381,000 cases, all right, next question is where, right? Where are these cases occurring? So I'll double click on country and I get a list. All right, that's fine. We'll spin it around so it's easier to read, and I just want to find out where the most cases are. So we'll quickly sort this and see, all right, in China and India. All right, I mean, that kind of makes sense though, because they are the most populous countries on the planet. So I really want to bring in what the population is as a component to my analysis. So let's grab the population. We'll bring that out here as well. And all right, so it kind of follows the same pattern, but I do see a little break there, right? Where, you know, for example, we get down to Indonesia has a larger population, you know, not quite as high up on the total number of cases. So there's some ratio here that I need to look at, basically the percent of the population that suffers from diabetes, right? And when I go through my measures that came over in this data set, I don't have anything that represents that particular value. So I really need to add this to my data. Fortunately, I have the components needed, so let's go ahead and build out that calculation. We'll create a calculated field here. We'll call it total prevalence. We'll call that a percentage. And that's basically the total number of cases divided by the total population. Okay, says the calculation's good. I like that. Throw it out here. And before I put it out onto my visual, I'm thinking ahead as well right now. I'm like, when people start using this data model, if I pass this out to someone else to look at it, I want to build some standards around it. So the first thing I want to do is ensure that this number comes across as a percentage, right? So it's very clear what it is. Additionally, I want to add in some explanation about what this might be, somewhat of a data dictionary here. So let's say formula is total cases divided by the adult population. So if someone else were to look at this data set and want to start building out their own visual, if they were curious as to how this came about, I could hover over that and see exactly what that field means, or whatever information I want to pass along. Right? All right, and then lastly, I suspect I'm going to use this to visually look at data maybe on a map or some other ways. I want to have some consistency when I do that, and so in this case I want to color my data, and I don't like just a green spectrum. I want to show maybe a broader spectrum, go red to blue and reverse it around. So in this case, I can already tell there's some place where there's almost a 38% of the population has diabetes. I want that to be red so it stands out visually for me, and then everything else can be blue in the lower spectrum. And in this case, I'm more curious about having a visual KPI. So what I want to do here is specify, you know what, anything up to 25% and above should just be red, so it's very obvious to me. Okay, so I've built some standards around that total prevalence value. So if someone else builds a visual using this data set, we have some consistency in the look and the calculations. All right, so let's bring this out here and take a look to see what that changes. All right, and now I want to sort by this actual ratio, and I get a whole different picture, right? So now I see Tokelau is tops. I had never heard of Tokelau until I saw this particular visual, right? So and I did this last night, and the first thing I thought was, where is that, right? So we'll get to that in a minute. But I see that these bars are really small here, so I can't really even see them. So let's throw some numbers out here to kind of see what we're dealing with. All right, so the population is extremely small, which I knew, and this is in thousands. So I probably need to show some more detail on this, right? But I want to take a look to see what's the underlying data here. Is this just garbage data that I can ignore, or is it legitimate? So as I select elements, I get these tooltips which show me more information about the items I've selected. One of the beautiful things is I can actually get to that transactional underlying data to validate it on the fly, right? It's very much within the flow of you working with the data. So in this case, I want to look at not the summary, but the underlying data. There's that one row of data. And as I work across here, I see that, so they have 700 people on, and I'm starting to think this is probably an island or a very, very small country wedged in between a bunch of others. And they have 265 cases, or 0.26 thousands, cases of diabetes. So there are legitimate numbers there, and looking at that ratio, it does come out to about 38%. So it's a small country that has a high diabetes rate. That's just the way it is, and there's a few others out here, and I can kind of get a sense of the Marshall Islands. We're dealing with some maybe things in the APAC area or so. But the key thing here I've been able to do in a few minutes is answer probably 4 or 5 questions, build out an additional calculation. I haven't really thought about the manipulations of the data. I'm actually getting and asking questions and answering them as I'm working through it. So it's a very natural process. So I just want to pause. Does this seem like the kind of stuff you'd be doing? And is it easier or harder than what you're doing now? Anyone? Easier? All right. Good deal. All right, so let's go ahead and pull some of these off here. I just want to stick with that one analysis. So I got an idea, all right, which are the countries that have the highest rates? And then I want to look at some other categorical fields that I could slice this up by. So IDF region, I'm assuming that's the International Diabetes Foundation. If I look at it by that and sort in this group, I was kind of surprised. North America and the Caribbean are the highest, right? So on an aggregate basis. Now, looking at this and at country as well, there seems to be a natural hierarchy here, right? So these countries fall into these different regions. So I actually want to explode in or drill into one of these areas, and I imagine when I publish this out for others to look at, they're going to want to do the same thing, potentially, right? So if I bring this out, I want to have a mechanism where they can work their way up and down that hierarchy and look at this data at whatever level of detail is important to their analysis. So to build that hierarchy out, we'll just drag and drop these elements on top of each other. And so now I have this ability to collapse, if I click right there, or drill into it. And I can extend that even further if I chose to, right? So now if I go in and let's take a look at maybe Southeast Asia, we'll just keep that. So here's another thing, with these buttons on the tooltip, I want to drill in just to look at Southeast Asia. I want to keep that for now and then work my way in a little bit more detail and see Mauritius and go ahead and take a look at the details on that. So it allows that flexibility to start working with your data and explore and go down certain paths to see if anything sticks out. Okay, so let's roll it back up to the top and we'll take our filter off. All right, so let's call this sheet here Come on, stay up there. Percent. There we go. All right. So now I want to take a look at, let's go ahead and take a look at our total diabetes. Actually, our percent of the population has diabetes. And I'm just kind of curious if there's any correlation to the GDP per capita of those particular countries that plays a role in there. So I have my GDP per capita here, and then I want to take a look at it across all countries. And I'm not really sure how to visualize that, right? I'm looking for outliers or anything that kind of sticks out. So in this case, I'm going to leverage Show Me. And Show Me is basically a collection of visual best practices that allow you to use these as a starting point for your analysis. So I could, look at this as a tabular chart, very uninteresting. I won't find much there. Won't click on the pie. I can try, let's see, this is not really helpful. It's a tree map. So for outliers, I love scatter plots, right? And so in this case, I got this scatter plot, and the first thing I see is I got one really crazy French Polynesia has a per capita of $3 billion, right? I don't know if that's right or not. Either way, it's kind of messy. Either way, it's messing up my analysis, right? So for the time being, I'm just going to get rid of it, and I see a little bit more valuable information here, right? Now to add some more texture to this, we had looked at IDF region. I want to see if there's any kind of correlation or clumping of countries from a particular region. So let's color that by those regions, and now I can kind of see, here's Europe, kind of all pretty much in the same area there, 5 to 15%. Kind of work my way through, and as I get out to here, the Western Pacific, I see that's where most of these particular countries are located. And so I'm getting closer to figuring out where Tokelau is located, right? Because as I go way out here, there it is, very small GDP per capita and very high diabetes rate. So this allows you to look at data from many different perspectives, but the key is that Show Me can help you figure out what might be a good way to go about doing that, right? Okay, so let's call this our GDP scatter. GDP percent scatter. Okay. Now, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this chart. This is another great thing you can do is just make copies of this as you're going through, save what you got, go off on a different tangent. And in this particular case, I happen to have some data on how much countries spend on diabetes patients. And I want to see, is there any correlation there, or do countries with higher GDP capita spend more? Just what would that data show me? It just happens that came from a different source, right? So it's in a different file or it's in a different database. So I'll go ahead and connect to that alternate data. In this case, I send it out to an Excel file as well. Right. Now when I bring this in, I got my countries here. I have a couple that don't have any data along those informations. But now when I open it up here in Tableau, you'll notice I have a second data connection. I can have several different data connections. What I want to do is basically blend data from these two different files into one visual and see if there's any relationship there that is worthwhile. So Tableau has already identified this field here that's in common between both data sets and said, you know what, I'm going to link across this field when you're using any information from both of those files or tables. So what I want to do now is take this, that expenditures per person with diabetes, and replace the total prevalence and just kind of see, is there any correlation with GDP? And yeah, I mean, there is some correlation, but we have a few outliers here as well. But really, the most important aspect here is data blending, as we call it, allows you to be able to kind of prototype or see how does data from two disparate data sources work together. Yep.
When you merged the files there by that common dimension, was it only because the column name of country was identical, or was there some other way for it to diagnose or detect that?
Yeah, so for in this particular case, it determined that link based on like name fields, but there's a pretty good chance that's not going to be the case, right? So when you have instances where these fields are named differently, but you know the relationship exists, then you have the flexibility to edit those relationships and define your own. So you could come in here and specify that country over here is actually IDF region or whatever the case might be. So if you have those, if you want to build that custom relationship, you can certainly do that, right? And what's happening is we're really just doing the equivalent of a left join. For those who are familiar with SQL, that's what's happening here. So we're not physically merging the data, you're just looking at it in one consolidated view to see if there is a relationship. And it eliminates the need to have to load it into a data warehouse or go through the physical ETL process of merging that data together. So I always think of data blending as a tactical tool. If you have two very large data sets, I would probably advise against using that because you're going to have some performance hits. It's not a database system. It's really there to take some ad hoc data you put together on your desktop and slice up a large data set using that ad hoc criteria. But it's nice to figure out, is there a relationship, and do I want to maybe make this more permanent part of my overall data environment? Okay, so we'll do this one as our blending. Okay. All right. So going back to this scatter for a moment though, so I can do a few different things on here. If I wanted to, in this case, add some reference lines, I want to look at what's the average GDP and go put that out there. And I can start dropping that in and start getting some more idea of who falls above or below the average. Maybe I'm not really curious about the average, right? Let's get rid of that one there. And let's remove that and put in a different one here. So you have a variety of options. In this case, let's go look at, we'll look at quartiles and put that out there. And so you can get a distribution perspective of your data along those lines. So as I'm going through this, I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting enough, but now I'm kind of curious, within these different regions, what's the distribution by country? Is there one region that has much more, a widespread distribution of diabetes? Just is there anything that kind of sticks out? So I want to take a look at the total prevalence, and let's take a look at IDEF region and by country, right? So by region for each country, give me a distribution of, I want to take a look at what the breakdown is of diabetes. So in this case, I want to use a box and whisker plot. That's just a nice way of having categorical distributions. And I can quickly, with a couple clicks, get a breakdown, and I can see that there's a lot more volatility or widespread distribution in the Western Pacific area, so the islands. And then things in, where was it, North America? Yeah, pretty compact, but there's a few outliers, probably some of the Caribbean islands out here, right? There's Aruba and on the Whisker Curacao, right? So the key thing here is you're able to, again, get a statistical breakdown very, very quickly and visually to find outliers. Okay, let's go ahead and rename this to box. All right, so let's figure out where Tokelau really is, right? So I'm getting there. So I have this this geographic field, and Tableau figured it out. Now there may be instances that Tableau can't automatically identify it. We do a couple things. We look at the data, we look at the field names, and try to identify it. If for some reason it still comes in as a string, you have the flexibility to specify the geographic role. These are all built in. Oops. So any of these roles, you drop it on there, and Tableau will then automatically figure out how to render that on a map. So in this case, I want to take a look at the total prevalence by country. And I could double-click my way through there as well. And it's going to produce a map for me and then kind of drop the prevalence on there. In this case, I want to go to Show Me and say, you know what, I like filled maps is a good way of looking at this. And boom. So now I get... So it's much easier in this field map now to see where some hotspots are. So Saudi Arabia, approaching 20%, it's kind of the higher end of my scale there. And as I hover over these red spots, I know one of these is Tokelau, I just can't find it, right? So that's kind of a pain. So I have a couple of options here, right? One thing is I want to have a filter to be able to identify the range of countries I'm looking at, right? So here's a little slider that kind of lets me work my way through and shrink down that range. So in this case, everything that's over 12%. And as I'm working through it, my data is reflecting what's going to be left over. So it's still too much. I'm like, you know what? I don't really care. Just, I want to show me anything that's over 35%. And there it is, right? There's Tokelau. I found it eventually. So, and this is what I did last night. I'm figuring, all right, now I know I have it on my screen. I just don't know where it is. I know it's somewhere in the Western Pacific Island range. So I'm just going to zoom out of here step by step. As I'm working my way out, I see, okay, I'm getting close. Let me find some place that I can recognize, right? And Fiji. Okay, so now I know kind of where it is. As I work my way out of here even further, now I'm just kind of curious, where is Australia, where is Hawaii? Am I not clicking there? There we go, back it out. So there's Australia, and I know it's in the center of my screen somewhere, but it's 700 people in the middle of the ocean, right? So I'm gonna assume that it's some little spot right there. Actually it is right there. But so now I have an idea of where it is, and you know, that mystery was solved for me. But so let's go ahead and now that filter's there. I want to go ahead and reset this back to normal. I do like the ability of being able to slice into that data. So as I start now transitioning into wanting to share this to other people, I want to have some functionality available to them, right? So I like that idea of a filter based on the province, so they can find, you know, where are the low spots? Is it the richer countries? Actually, no, right? It's not. I can't explain that yet, but you know, it was something that kind of stuck out to me. So, and I can work through a window of data as I slide around. So I like this little tool for that end user to work with. The other thing I want to be provided is for the user to be able to select a region if they want to focus in on a particular area. And let's go ahead and make this a little more compact because this might be used on a mobile device. So let's go multiple values drop down. So now we'll get the same functionality, but in this case I want to focus in on just Europe, and I'll just see countries in there, or maybe the Western Pacific, and kind of find my hotspots there, right? So that seems like a decent functional tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename this my map. So I'm kind of satisfied with the capabilities I'm going to give my end consumer. I want to start maybe putting all this together into a cohesive. Yep.
I have a question. Does the mapping function work with historical data at all? Like say if I was looking at something in the former Soviet Union, would it be able to look a map like that? Or is it, 2015?
Yes, so that's a great question. So the maps in terms of historical data or previous boundaries, I guess you're asking, right? Well, these maps are online, so they're constantly being updated as municipalities, and our threshold is a population of I think 15,000 for a city. As municipalities cross that threshold, they'll be added or removed from there. So they are being updated. If you have that old historical geographical data, you can load that in here or use that as a reference and plot against it. So if you want to do any kind of custom mapping of any type, a lot of our customers will do it for regions, for coverage, things like that. You are certainly capable of doing it.
And what's the format for that? Maps, excuse me, on GeoRef?
Yeah, they're polygon shape files, so you can take an Esri file and convert it over and you're good to go. Yeah. Yeah. And we have a lot of great examples online and can help you out there if you want to get into it.
Can you use something like that slider function to piggyback on the historical data thing?
Yeah, everything fits in together, so absolutely.
So you could show change over time with this?
Yeah, so change over time, we have a feature called the paging shelf, which you can animate. The only thing that is, it doesn't translate to the server side, so if you're in desktop, you just want to analyze changes over time, you can certainly do that. And I have another data set that has time variant data, so I can show you that. We don't have any trends in here because of the nature of this data, but I will hit that. Yeah. Okay, so I want to go and start putting this together into a dashboard that will have some interactivity and allow the user to kind of work with this data to their needs. So I want to start bringing things over onto my dashboard. We'll bring that map over, and it brings all over my, my two filters there. And let's bring over that, let's see here, not the data plane, this one here. What is that? Okay, that's good. I'll get some actual numbers, and maybe that box plot. I like that for whatever reason, right? Okay, and let's bring the scatter too. So I just got all these out here. I know it's getting a little busy on the screen there, right? All right. So what I want to do now is make sure that there's some interactivity between this. So make sure my filters are going to hit everything. Oops. So if I go ahead and change this to just Africa, exclude Africa. Let's take everything out. Bring in Africa. It's applying everything. All right, that's good. So what I really want to do now is, if I want to focus in on maybe this little area right here, as I select regions, I want to be able to update these particular visuals or anything else on my dashboard for my selected items, right? So to build that interactivity in, I'm going to go ahead and set this as my filter. And so now this map is going to drive the rest of my dashboard. And I'll bring this down here, and I select that, and it shows me the regions I've selected. and then what the distribution is there. So the key thing for that is that you may have built out this map to visually bring attention to a hotspot, and it's not going to conform to regional boundaries of any nature. So you just want to select those countries that are of interest and then see where they end up. So it allows you to look at your data from multiple perspectives and see if things stick out as you're finding things of interest in one perspective. Where is that correlated, or how is that correlated to other areas? I could likewise turn this around and say, I want to take a look, use this box plot. Oops, bring that back. Use this box plot as a filter as well. And now I want to see these outliers that I have. Where are these located? And so I'm able to do that as well, right? And figure out, I got one over here, Puerto Rico's out there, and then I had a couple down here that are highlighted. Kind of hard to see on those, right? So I think there's great value in being able to build out these dashboards so quickly, and even if they're not polished from a presentation perspective, but they become a really easy tool for you to at least look at your data from multiple perspectives without having to go through a lot of back-end coding work. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see, diabetes dashboard. Okay, so now I want to publish this out to server so I can share this with everyone else in the group and say, hey, take a look at what I put together. Is this getting closer to being functional for us? So let's go ahead and publish this out to server. Publish that workbook. And I'll log in. You know what? There's got to be a way to hide that. All right. And in this case, I can define where I want to publish it to. So I'll pick the default project. We allow you to have different projects for different groups. So you have permissions around that. When you publish content to a project, it's going to inherit the security associated with that project. In this case, I just want that diabetes dashboard out there, and let's just go publish it. Yeah, replace that. All right, so it's going to package up my data, my dashboard, push it out to server, and now I can go take a look to see how it looks from that perspective. And this is more of that consumer role. These are folks who are going to come into that content that's available to them. And you saw some examples that Lee showed with Ramon's work on our Tableau public site. This is how your experience would be on your internal Stanford server. And you'll see that the look is very similar to what you have on the desktop. The functionality is still there. So as I hover over these countries, I get my little information tooltip where I can select, oops. All right, so I'll select Saudi Arabia in this case, right? And I think I can control select others. Yeah, so as I work my way through, I can have that same interactivity. In this case, I want to go now drill in, take a look at Kazakhstan, and you know what? What's the data associated there? So I'm getting in, drilling in, looking at the transactional data to validate, yep, there's the details about the data that came from Kazakhstan, and show me everything in there. So if I was other information I wanted to take a look at, that could stick out as well, right? So in this server component, I may be focused on a particular area because this diabetes research is related to some other work that I'm doing on, Southeast Asia. So I want to click there and just keep that data available to me, and I want to focus on this for the next week. I don't need to come in here and change that filter every time, so I want to save this. And so call that Southeast Asia. Okay, and we'll save that. So I've saved my own perspective of that dashboard with my preferences. I can actually share that with other users as well. So it can be a really great collaborative tool if you have a general purpose dashboard and you allow that end consumer to work with some of the filters and elements on there. They can come up with their own insights and then collaborate as well by sharing that preference or that perspective of theirs with other users. And for things that, if it's an ongoing situation where new data is coming in and I want to be kind of keep abreast of how that content might be changing my map, I can subscribe to this dashboard, so I'll receive an email on a periodic basis. There's a few different schedules. You can build your own as to how often you'll receive that email. It'll contain a snapshot of the dashboard. Clicking on it will take you into it so you can actually interact with it. Okay. You do have a few abilities to share this as a static image, produce a PDF, and even get to the underlying data. Some basic formatting functions there. And as a collaborative tool, you can also have that download link enabled. So if other folks in the group want to see how you put your work together or kind of take it and build upon that, they're able to download that and move on forward. We have a few links built in for sharing it. You can copy paste this into an email, pass it off to someone, and then some basic code to embed this into a portal if you wanted to make it public facing or even on an internal portal. Okay. All right, so one last thing on the server side. There may be instances where you want to allow for the end consumer to maybe kind of take this work a little further. They just don't happen to have desktop and they need to do something kind of on the fly. So there's a question that needs to be answered. The answer is in this data, just not presented in the way that you need. So you have this, what we call web authoring. And this is an environment that's similar to desktop, but this is all browser-based. So it works on a mobile device. I've seen people do this on a phone. I don't know why, but you can. So here I have the flexibility to kind of change my visual. In this case, I'm looking at the map color-coded by total prevalence. I'd rather look at it by GDP, right? And that shows me a slightly different perspective, kind of there. Maybe not. Didn't really do that, did it? I'd check that out. Or I can build out a new visual here. So let's take a look at maybe GDP by adult population. Let's go ahead and click that there. And actually, you know what? Income group. So I can go ahead and start answering new questions, again, all in a web environment. I still have access to show me for different types of visualizations. Okay. So the last thing I want to touch upon was, I'm going to jump out of server and go back to desktop for a moment, which is over here. We went through this process and built out this dashboard, but we also built out a data model that has a hierarchy, a calculated field, and I could do a lot more within here. I want to make this available to others who want to analyze this diabetes data, right, in the Stanford community. So I want to publish, maybe not the dashboard, but just this data itself to the server. And we'll publish that out. That's good. And so if someone else comes in and wants to get access to that data, they're not going to get the Excel file necessarily. They'll connect to their Tableau server instance. And what they'll see is a list of data connections that have been made available to them. So here's that diabetes data that someone put together, published out there. If I go in, I'm going to have that same information, that same formula for calculating the prevalence, and that same hierarchy. So if I build out, this should work. If I build out that map, I don't need that there. I'm going to get that same color coding, so there's consistency, the formula to the appearance of it, and you're all speaking the same language there. Right? So that third perspective is that typical user who's going to come in and access data. And you know, from a security perspective, it's really nice because you can kind of centrally manage access to data as well, instead of giving access to direct databases as you know, your adoption of Tableau grows. So I know we kind of went through that quick, but I want to give Trace some time as well. Any questions? Easy, hard? Yep.
If you want to embed in like a blog or private website, you have to go through the server and do that from the desktop version.
So from the desktop, if you want an embed, you'd make a PDF or a PNG file and then just embed that into your server piece. It would be static. If you want any interactivity, then you're going to have to use a server component. Yeah. Now, if you're dealing with public data, you can obviously use Tableau Public, or if you're dealing with data you don't care is public, then you can publish it to Tableau Public and use that link and embed that into your blog post.
And then the interface is similar to the server.
It'll be identical. In fact, that's what I think we have over. Where did my browser go? Over here. I'll just show you, because these embedded visuals that Lindsay showed you, these are on Ramon's blog itself. And the way you can tell it's Tableau Public is we have our branding on here, but here's the functionality. You can grab it as image or PDF. You can still click through this and select elements on here. It's a little slower on this case, but first access. So yeah, the functionality will be the same. And in fact, we're running, I think, version 9 server on here as well. So yeah, this is where if you wanted to embed this and you couldn't do it through your existing server, and there may be firewall issues associated with that, Tableau Public is a perfectly good option for public data. Mm-hmm.
If you want to replicate what you did, there's a way to keep track of what you've been doing.
You're talking about like versioning or something of your content, or how do you mean keep track of what you've done?
Yeah, like if you want to, if you don't remember all the steps you did to keep, to get to this part, a way to go back and to remember what variables have you been moving.
Right. So the only thing I could say is that the undo button we have is unlimited undo, which it's a great feature, and it's not there because people mess up. It's really there to give you the freedom to say, I want to go down this path and figure out where this thought leads me, but have breadcrumbs to come all the way back to that fork in the road, right? Because so many times, and I was a developer, I started going down this one way and forget what I was doing before. So I just hit undo, and I've done it 100 times in this case. I've undone a lot of work because I have that knowledge, or the comfort level that I know I can get back to where I split off and get back to work that was important to me. So you have two options there. I think one is duplicate the sheet and then go off on your tangent, or use the undo and work your way back, yeah.